Hi everyone, this is the latest episode of App Growth Talks, a series of interviews with experts on mobile marketing and growth. And this episode's special guest is Simon Thillay. He's the head of ASO at AppTweak, and he's a prominent speaker, influencer, and expert on mobile app growth. Hi Simon, thank you so
Hi,
much for
Lena.
joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Simon. And let's start. Simon, could you please share how you started your career and why your choice eventually fell on mobile marketing and App Store optimization in particular?
Sure. So I think the first start was before properly starting in ASO. My first contact with ASO was when I interned at a mobile game studio in Rotterdam, where for the first time I was put in contact with App Store Connect and having to just add keywords in consoles, trying to track certain metrics. And at the time, I had no particular idea of what ASO was, but I was just interested in app marketing and in games. Um, and about a year later, I started full time at Deezer, a French mobile streaming service, music streaming service, where I was recruited to work on ASO, SEO, and also help our UA team with coordinating with tech teams on any tracking issues we would have with MMPs, etc. So this is really where I kind of learned, I think, most of what I know about growth, and since then it's just been kind of trying to keep my curiosity to learn more.
Yeah.
And I think after 2.5 years, I decided to specialize in ASO and to join AppTweak, where today I'm head of ASO, and I lead a team of ASO experts who work as consultants for some of our top enterprise clients, and assisting them with everything ASO across multiple regions of the world, multiple app verticals. And it's been really fulfilling to kind of play with ASO in many different industries in a way.
Oh, cool. Very interesting. So you started basically your path like a universal professional. You worked with SO, with SEO, with user acquisition, and that's really cool. You have such a versatile experience. I think that helped you. And that's cool that you are part of the coolest AppTweak team now. And could you please share one thing or a few things, the most important things you learned during these years in the mobile industry?
Sure. I think two things I learned that kind of go together are first, how it's important to always think about the user's perspective and the user context. Um, I remember when interning at this mobile game studio, uh, I realized one very important thing, which is that you need to take into account things like the average session duration, to kind of understand if you want to play players to play for at least a certain number of minutes in your game. Um, you need to make sure your game fits that profile of users, for instance. And it definitely applies also to ASO, whether it's about which keywords you should select, which creatives to show. It's all about thinking who are going to be the people meeting your product, encountering your product, and what are the things that they are going to want to know. And I think then the second thing is to, as a result, be able to look beyond just the face value of a metric, and actually make sure you kind of understand how much it can tell you. And the example I love to give about this when we speak purely about ASO is how much you can learn from a keyword's volume. It's been something that a lot of people take for granted, and I know that when ASO experts do keyword optimization, it's definitely one of the metrics they look at. But every now and then, I always try to advise my team to take a step back and take also the time to understand what it means if a keyword has a certain volume, how its volume being different from another keyword can mean something very important. And so I know that if we're talking about branded keywords, for instance, a very easy way to help user research teams for some of our clients is just to provide brand notoriety comparisons based on the keyword volume.
Yeah, interesting. And regarding your first point, it's something I also think about because it's close to A/B testing. Our tool Optimize is designed for A/B testing on the App Store. So one of the metrics is the duration, how long users actually scrolled through the screenshots. And so I think it's also important um, to watch such metrics and see if users are interested, if they find what they need in your mobile app and game. So thank you so much for sharing. And you mentioned mobile games. Speaking of mobile games, it is actually a huge market now, and there are a lot of game categories, starting from casuals and to RDPs, and probably there are some ASO techniques that could drive visibility on the app stores for some specific game categories. Could you please share if there are any?
Sure. I think it's not just for games, but as a whole, there's a wide variety of options to get more visibility. You could turn to keyword optimization for organic search, Apple search ads, or I'm not a big fan of UAC, but I know UAC kind of offers a counterpart to Apple search ads. If you're looking for more paid search visibility, when it comes to browse, ideally it's having a contact with Apple or Google with the editing teams, but without that you can still kind of just frame your app. Making sure you have great metrics is important in that case. Being able also to bring, I think in-app events right now are a huge part of that. And there's more. One thing I personally believe is underestimated today is using app clips on iOS, because they have a very high entry cost in the sense that you need to actually develop something to use app clips. You don't need to develop something to but for app clips, even though it's just going to be compiling a short experience of what your game has to offer, it can be challenging to say we're going to test something, and for that test we already need to have developers work on the project. I know that when we do marketing, usually we like to avoid having to ask for too many resources. But the upside from app clips, in my opinion, is that they're really built for virality. And so it's not going to be something that works for all games. But I think for games that really want to build their user acquisition on virality and referral techniques, and that have a very clear experience of what the game is going to become, they can still be an amazing opportunity to try and grow your user base on iOS.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. I know that not all publishers know actually about this feature, app clips. So thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's definitely worth trying for games, because you never know how it works for you until you try, until you test. So thanks. And you just mentioned Apple Search Ads, and my next question is related to this channel. Could you please share your take on this channel, and specifically its interrelation with ASO, if it exists in your opinion? Basically, the question is, can ASO be influenced with Apple success and vice versa? Do you know any cases probably?
Yeah, it's a vast topic. I think overall, my opinion on Apple Search Ad is that I sometimes regret it exists. I sometimes enjoy the fact that it exists, but it doesn't matter in the end whether we should have advertising in the search result or not. It's just a fact that there are advertising opportunities for apps, and so it's important to understand how to best leverage them. And here I think there's definitely an interrelation because from Apple we know that the price of an auction is not set only based on how much an app is willing to bid, but the winner is also selected based on relevance, which can be established with two main criteria, which are going to be whether the targeted keyword is actually in the app's metadata, and also how well the app converts for that keyword. Um, so
Yeah.
there's definitely a huge role that ASO has to play to kind of optimize the ASA strategy, and vice versa is also true. First, because ASA is a huge part of how we calculate the volume of keywords, but also because ASA can help you um, boost traffic towards your app for a certain keyword, which can then help you also establish relevancy in a way, because suddenly you make sure you get impressions and Apple gets to measure your conversion rate and how many downloads per day do you receive from the keyword, which can potentially increase your organic rankings as well. Now, it's important to know it's not automatic. There was something in the beginning of search that where just targeting a keyword would be enough, but it's not the case anymore. But I think it's really interesting there. And now that Apple also introduced custom product pages,
Yeah.
there's even new synergies to go after. So I think as a whole, it's a very interesting tool, and it's really important to combine both ASO and ASA if you're really trying to boost your acquisition strategy around around search rather.
Thanks so much. You guessed my next question. We can skip it. Or I was going to ask, what would you advise to bet on 2022, 2023 to place your budget on organic acquisition or other paid acquisition? But I think you just answered
It's
that.
both. It's both. You shouldn't do one or the other. It's more of a make sure that you if you have the budget, do both, and make sure that if you have different people doing it, ensure they speak to each other, because the reality is your overall budget will be best spent if you actually work together and build the synergies between the two channels.
I totally agree. Now it's all about synergy, and if previously UA teams and ASO teams they didn't communicate much, now there are um, appear growth teams in many companies that involve both experts on ASO and paid UA. And is it possible to scale with ASO solely without any paid channels, or in the competitive environment today, it's not real? What do you think?
Um, that's a very challenging question. I will say I believe it's possible. It's probably harder than kickstarting the flow of users with paid UA, but I do think it's possible. And there, what's very important is actually to kind of understand what ASO actually is, because I think a lot of people still think ASO is purely about keyword optimization. And I've seen a couple examples of people achieving growth and scaling through pure keyword optimization, but that would take a lot of time. And there, what's really important is to to really have a long-term strategy of not going after high-value keywords at first, but rather start small, start in countries where keywords are not going to be too competitive. It's always funny to me when someone tells me I want to get to the top 5 positions for very high-value keywords in the US, because that's a situation where uh, I can guarantee I will do my best, but also there are at least 50 other apps that are also doing their best in
Yeah.
trying to achieve that. And it comes down to more than just which keywords you target. So start small, start in smaller markets where there's not as much competition, and just ramp up and keep building it. And it's going to take still a lot of time. But also, if we're thinking about using ASO to scale as a whole, remember that ASO is not just keyword optimization. There's actually a lot to do with creatives, with reviews and ratings, in-app events. Now, there's even not there's not just the sole goal of getting more new downloads from ASO anymore. I think what's really changed in the past year with ASO is that we went from having a single focus on always getting new downloads to actually now being able to try and adjust our ASO tactics to whether we want to serve the purpose of improving new downloads, or actually helping with re-downloads, or even building towards retention and monetization depending on the message that we give. So I know, I think it's Jesse Lampinen who shared an image he gives, and that I find really really nice, about ASO being more of the fuel for your rocket when you scale, than being one of the pillars. It's no matter how you want to build your growth, ASO has the opportunity to help you add add traction to what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. I really liked it. And about scaling with ASO, I think you mentioned markets with not too competitive keywords. I think that might also work for a small niche, something new that no one discovered, right, yet, like red ocean and blue ocean. But overall, thank you so much for describing ASO today, because there are some myths, some newcomers to the industry are misguided. I think is that SEO is just an analog to SEO, but it's much, much more. I like that.
I've been
Yeah,
fighting the notion of ASO being like SEO for more than 2 years now. I think that in a way, it's become harder today, because one thing I used to say as to why ASO and SEO are so very much different is that
yeah,
you come from the same philosophy, but the problem you have is that in ASO you're only given one page to say as much as you can uh, about the entire all the features in your product. And when you do SEO, you could actually think of having one landing page for each feature, and maybe
yeah.
even multiple landing pages per feature, but to highlight different benefits. So there's a very different result in how you do it.
Yeah, it's a great reason. I will remember it. That really, it's basically a small page, restricted number of symbols, of images, and the website and Google search is just another planet. Thank you, Simon. And do you run, not personally, probably you, but your team? Do you run A/B tests? And if yes, do you have some best practices?
Uh, I think I became a bit famous for running ABB tests,
Yeah,
and that's because um, I'm used to working with clients whose budget means that you kind of want to use the free tools provided by Google. I would say by Apple as well, but we've actually seen that currently PPO is far from perfect. So we're not making it a priority to use PPO when wanting to test creatives today. And so the important things to know about A/B testing is understanding how the test is being powered, and as a result, what what statistical power and what statistical significance are you going to get from your tests. And so the notion when I suggested ABB tests was that when it comes to role plays, they've actually made changes recently, but until recently, you were forced to have results presented as a 90% confidence interval, and you would also not be in control of how the sampling of your test was being made, which meant that there was actually a risk that uh, by splitting traffic 50-50, you could actually have uh, 80% of sample A that would be composed by users who had searched for your brand name, and only 20% of the rest, and the opposite for the sample B, which then meant that the differences you could observe in behavior and in conversion were actually not because of the creatives that you had introduced, but just because the samples were different. And so the reasoning for ABB was just to say that if you see the same trend in what the test believes are sample B and sample C, but what you know to be two different samples seeing the same thing, then you know not to trust the test too much, and that it's probably best to kind of try something different. But if you see the same trend, then you can start thinking that it's true. Your results are actually coming from having introduced a different creative than what you had in your control version.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. Actually, there are, I'm sure you know that different methods like Bayesian, multi-armed bandit, classic sequential A/B testing. But I totally agree with your case about 50 and 50 amount of traffic. You couldn't be 100% sure that the experiment results are right, because to be this 100% sure, you should involve 100% of your audience, right? And that's not the way it usually works. So it's an important tip. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to add to your point, I think it's also important to remember that the result of an A/B test is not the guarantee of a conversion uplift, but just a, it's just a picture of what performed best as you were testing, and it's meant to just give you directional information as to what users may prefer. And you still have to build on it, and you still have to keep monitoring, because what users prefer tomorrow may not be what they prefer in a month. So it's the always test approach.
Yeah, totally agree. Everything is changing with the lightning speed, so you should test, test, and test. But that's worth testing, because you check your hypothesis and you don't change something for the worse. For example, you check something, don't change for the worse, and don't drop your conversion on the App Store. So
Absolutely, and remember that a successful test is a test that helps you learn something, even if you don't confirm what you thought would make a difference. If you know it's actually not useful, then you've
yeah.
learned something, and you should still think this test was successful.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you, Simon. And you mentioned PPO, that it's not too effective today for some reasons. Personally, I think that it's a great opportunity for like young publishers, newcomers, new companies to take advantage of such a tool to A/B test. But of course, it has a number of restrictions. So, and what about custom product pages? Have you dealt with this tool or not yet?
I've started dabbling with it. Just to go back to the point about PPO, I want to make clear that I don't think PPO is worthless, but it's more that the challenge I have, especially with the clients I work with, is that a lot of them work on a 7-day release cycle. And because PPO today are interrupted as soon as you submit a new app version, it means that most of my clients have just no option to run a test for at least 7 days, which I consider to be really the minimum you should do for a proper test.
Sure.
But I do agree that for smaller ads that may not have as short release cycles, there's already more opportunities to leverage PPO. Now,
Yeah.
about custom product pages, I've started theorizing about them, and I've actually started conducting a couple of experiments. But what I'm seeing so far is that the challenge is to actually get enough resources to do them, and to take the time also to actually figure out how to do them depending on the app. I think each app needs to have their own CPP strategy, and or rather they need to look at their overall marketing strategy and decide how CPPs can best fit in that overall strategy. And so I don't think too many apps, too many developers already use CPPs. I think also the fact that currently only Iron Source and Apple Search Ads are compatible when it comes to tracking and optimizing performances has slowed down the adoption of custom product pages. But with that being said, I think that this specific question is going to change very fast in the second half of 2022. I think a lot of other networks are going to become compatible. And between that and the fact that more companies will have figured out how they want to create different custom product pages based on which segments of their audience they want to address and deliver a custom message to, there's going to be a lot more. And definitely the fact that Google also just announced changes to custom store listings to
Yeah.
rival and try to beat Apple at their own game means that there's going to be a lot of changes.
Yeah, so it's a trend and adoption will grow. And now the Apple Search Ads users, they are more and more taking advantage of the channel. But there are many questions how to use, what strategy to choose. So we actually at SplitMetrics acquire are preparing a CPP playbook, custom product pages guide. So we'll share it soon. And thank you, Simon. And we've just discussed iOS 15 features, but it's also it has almost become a thing of the past. I'm just kidding, of course, but I now want to talk about iOS 16. What about this new iOS? Are you keeping are you keeping your eye on these updates recently announced by Apple?
I would say per my job, I have to keep an eye on it.
Sure.
So far, the announcements from WWDC have, I would say, mostly confirmed my expectations that iOS 16 was going to be less significant in terms of ASO. I think the big changes for ASO were in iOS 15, and now it's more of fine tuning. There are some interesting opportunities for certain apps, and definitely for small or large companies, but as long as they're able to be very reactive, there's going to be opportunities, especially for featuring the first few months of iOS 16, if they adopt new technologies like the background widgets or the new notification system, especially for news apps and the whole live events. Um, Now, I'm also keeping an eye on what's next, because I think that the most important things for ASO are not going to be necessarily announced but will be seen as we discover more of the iOS 16 beta. And also, I expect more about Apple search ads, which I did not expect to be mentioned in Google in Apple's keynote. But I do think there may be more changes to come with ASA, and depending on what Apple decides to do, I think it could arrive anytime between probably September and December.
Interesting. Let's check. Then I'll get back to you and tell you, oh, Simon, you were right. Let's see what happens. But this channel is definitely evolving at a high speed. And getting back to ASO a bit, I wanted to ask about cultural differences when you work on ASO. Have you noticed any specificity, peculiarities for specific markets? For example, for Asian markets in approach.
Of course, that's actually, I think, one of the most interesting games you can have in ASO is trying to learn more about how you can culturalize your store page and possibly even your app. And for that, I will mention that we have a whole guide on localization on the AppTweak blog, and some of my teammates have done very thorough research on best practices to localize for Asian markets. For instance, I know
Oh,
we
cool.
covered India recently, and last year we had also done a guide on localizing for Japan. And
Wow.
I think one really concrete example with Japan is how creatives are so different. The main trends in the US and Western Europe are really to have rather decluttered screenshots, very not necessarily empty, but very breathable creatives, easy to spot highlights, short sentences, and not too much text. And Japan is pretty much the opposite, with a lot of bright colors, a lot of elements everywhere. And I remember the creative director of a gaming studio we worked with, and we presented them with creatives for Japan. And what they did, what he did say at that time was wonderful to me, because his first reaction was to tell us, this is completely melting my brain, but then again, I'm not the user, I'm not the target. And he by that also admitted that we had kind of nailed how the cultural expectations were really different. And I love that quote, because for me it even summarized how our own designers felt when they were working on this topic, because they were basically having to relearn everything from scratch, because they had never worked on creatives for Japan before.
Oh, Simon, I'm so glad to hear that. First, about your localization guide, we'll add a link here to the description to our talk. Thank you. And secondly, this is so relevant that you mentioned about Japan, because one of our clients in the past shared practically the same experience. They shared how their design team struggled when developing screenshots, and they were like, do we really need to do that? And what worked eventually? Very vivid screenshots with a lot of elements, with emoji, with a lot of emoji, different captions, and this was so strange for their mentality. But that actually works for the Japanese market, so we should always take that into account. And
Yes,
one,
it sounds
yeah.
spot on, and I will say that it's really interesting to go to see the full process, and have teams, whether designers or also marketers from different places, just uh, learn and be able to admit that they in a way, like what they're doing goes against all their instincts, and then there may be a little phase of hating it at first, but especially when they see the results, it's really fun to see how suddenly they feel completely empowered to have learned this and actually made a big impact because they were willing to make the change.
Yeah, in the end, it's always rewarding. So it was doing that such a lot of iterations. Yeah, thank you, Simon. And to finish up, I wanted to ask you what are some trends you are most excited about? I mean, for mobile marketing, for the mobile industry as a whole. What do you think?
I don't know how much it qualifies as a trend, but obviously everything about customization in marketing. Um, I'm fascinated by how we're going to change so much of what we know in ASO, since custom product pages are now and custom store listings are going to introduce this change of not having one single page for everyone anymore. And for me, it's hard to fully apprehend how it changes what we've known. So I would say that that's definitely what I'm most excited about. And at the same time, I'm really curious about how there may be more uh, to do about it if Apple and Google push the technological support behind this, because I know one topic I've heard and I encourage everyone to mention when they talk to Apple and Google would be the possibility to get a dynamic parameter passed from the App Store or the Play Store to the app server, because one thing that could be done from that would be to have a custom product page with a specific messaging, a specific um, take on what the app has to offer, and be also something that is information fed to the app server once a download happens, so that you could actually serve a customized onboarding, or at least a specialized onboarding experience to the user who went through a certain custom product page. So here it's purely hypothetical. I don't know if Apple and Google will do it. I don't even know if they're working on it, but I know that multiple developers have already brought the topic to Apple and Google, and I hope as many as possible can do the same, because it would open so many new horizons for ASO and for app marketing that I'm really interested to see it happen.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you so much for joining this App Growth Talk episode. I've had a great pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you for having me. It was a great talk.
Thanks.